welcome to The Truth About the Banks, another episode where we're going to be interviewing Kevin Radford, who's going to be telling us about his experience with the banks and also the assistance that he's had from Advocate Douglas Shaw in this regard, as well as what things he's had to put up with through his whole procedure. So, Kevin, hello, welcome.
Hello, Bev. Very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully we can share things that benefit the rest of the people out there in a similar boat.
Yay! All right. Well, let's talk about that boat. What's your boat been? What is your experience been with the banks? What's happened to you?
Quite honestly, Bev, it's a long story. I've had so many experiences of a repeat nature. It's become a pattern. Going back 7 years or so is pretty much where it started. I had a thriving sort of software development company at that point in time that was doing well, had major clients on board, was building assets worth many, many millions, consuming a few million in the process, all self-funded, all going great. I used the spin-off of that company to allow me to invest in a few properties as a sideline sort of investment venture that I did to the tune of 9 rental properties that I bought, completely renovated, and then obviously rented out. All went very, very well. Properties were sort of full of equity, everything's honky-dory, everything's supporting itself, and all well until we had a sort of classic snag, which happens in a variety of flavors out there in life, in business life. Mine happened to be 3 top-notch clients that were top-notch, basically our best clients, who hit various snags in business. 2 of them ultimately went down. This was in the construction industry at the time. That sort of wiped out what was owed at the time, together with the sort of future value of contracts in place. That pretty much was what everything hinged on. Anyway, it was just one of those sort of unlucky, sort of fortuitous situations that put me in a spot, obviously. That was around about 7 years back. For the next sort of 2 odd years, I pretty much sort of bled the properties dry. All of the equity I built up, all of the sort of positive cash that was housed there, I pretty much sort of drew on to sort of keep funding the business, regaining clients, sort of continue with the expansion drive that we had. It basically just consumed a lot of money. And I thought, well, 2 years was more than enough in terms of a reserve, and then I'd sort of correct the situation and get back to sort of putting the properties back in positive territory. Unfortunately, as with most things, everything takes longer than you expect. Didn't quite make it, sort of ran into a spot then with paying back the properties that are now sort of pretty much at the hilt when it came to outstanding bonds. Realized I was in a bit of a spot at the time when I was sort of close to default. So rather than default, I approached the banks. It's been 3 months of incessant talk. I mean, I literally phoned and spoke day after day, had interviews, spent literally 3 months on the job looking to find a way to work things out with them. At that point in time, I was a sort of top-notch private banking client with regards to all 4 banks. I've got bonds with all 4 banks. So I've got a sort of pretty good idea of how the 4 sort of stack up against each other. And just to cut to the chase, they're all the same, so no difference there. Anyway, spent 3 months talking to them, looking to sort of preserve my position as what was a sort of top-end client in private banking circles, and work something out, thinking there'd be some measure of sort of preferential treatment around at least my history. I had 30 years of pristine sort of banking record, if you can call it that. Paid every cent owed, didn't default on a cent along the way, everything honky-dory perfect. To my dismay, they pretty much shunned me, pretty much sort of closed the door on me, pretty much threw me out and said, listen, either come to the party, pay everything in full, up to date within this 3-month period, or otherwise we hand you over.
Wow.
Which is exactly what they proceeded to do after 3 months. I then basically had no other recourse other than to look at ways and means of defending myself. I initially went the debt review route, which seemed to be an all-encompassing way of sort of taking control of the situation.
And oftentimes it's not really such a good idea, right?
Exactly. I mean, I was pretty naive in those days. I'm going back about 5 years now when I started down this path, beginning 2010. And ultimately, it was probably more trouble than it's worth, and ultimately ended up costing me a lot of money in the process. In hindsight, I would have basically sort of skipped those couple of years and gone straight to the chase, which is what we've been busy with the last 3 odd years. But in a nutshell, I got those debt review court orders in place, covering myself, another individual, and the trust that I had in play at the time, so 3 court orders. I basically paid those religiously, every cent owed, every month, for a period of close on 2 years, and there was absolutely no issue whatsoever, legally speaking or otherwise. Yet, in that 2-year period, the banks obviously decided that this wasn't enough for them fast enough, and they decided to defy those orders and basically go after me in full measure with summons after summons after summons, again and again and again. Sorry?
No, so I just want to just check with you. So, like, the experience that you've had, did you feel like it was you were being treated? Obviously, you didn't feel like you were being treated fairly, from what I'm hearing here. They weren't very fair in a lot of ways, considering that you've been like paying everything perfectly for 30 years. That it's just a bit of a snag that you've basically run into, and you're trying to pull yourself back together again, but neither are they treating you fairly or ethically throughout this whole process. I'm just wanting to kind of find that out here.
Just to answer that question, their treatment was abominable. Quite honestly, it was despicable every which way you look at it. There was nothing about their behavior that was in any sense moral or lawful. They purely had no intention of obeying the law, following the court orders in place. They felt that that wasn't enough soon enough. They decided to basically hit me with everything that they had, with one summons after the next, to basically try and take me out of the game, knowing that obviously I'm on the ropes. I've only got so much to spend on debt review payments, and there's nothing else in effect at that point. I was then in the unenviable position of having to take the money that was allocated for debt review payments and in effect use it to defend myself. That, with summons after summons over a period of about a year, put me in the position where in effect I went into default for the very, very first time. Unwillingly so, because I pretty much had no option. I had to defend myself, otherwise it would have been steamrolled. Then when I went into default for the first time, then they quickly sort of forget about the previous summonses. In other words, they don't follow those through because they know they're one unlawfully based. And now latch on to the one that actually hinges on real default. And they look to take you to the cleaners and go to town on that one. And that's currently when I pretty much got hold of Doug. That's about 3 years ago now. And in effect, dropped the whole debt review thing because it wasn't helping me in the slightest at that point. And we had to go all the way in terms of looking to defend the 6 properties that were under risk at the time, and find ways and means of looking after ourselves. And in the ensuing couple of years, look to obviously hold on to the properties at the same time, trying to sort of correct things behind the scenes, and one way or another try and force a reasonably moral, ethical, and lawful outcome here. Quite honestly, we're still battling with that 3 years later. There's lots of unlawfulness and immorality in play here. And
just a quick question: you still have all of your properties intact? You still basically, well, kind of have them, if that makes any sense. But they haven't foreclosed or anything on any of your properties as of yet.
They haven't essentially taken anything away, Bev. Basically, there's been a number of foreclosures and so on, a number of sort of points at which we reached sort of sale and execution, etc. Fortunately, each and every time we managed to avoid it. We've basically avoided in any way losing the properties or certainly having them come under the hammer. I'm looking to obviously maintain that at all costs, one way or another. But in 3 years, we've been pretty successful with regards arguments that we do have in our favour, and then obviously taking up on the bank's missteps in the process and trying to nail them every which way we can. Because quite honestly, we'll do anything that we can at this point to try and correct the wrongs and hang on to what is actually rightfully ours in terms of us having played the game.
Yeah, and I think it does sometimes feel like you're playing a game, doesn't it? Because now you've got to think strategically and got to start thinking about how can you go around this when you shouldn't be needing to do that in the first place because you haven't really done anything wrong.
You're so right, Bev, you're so right. And that's what really sort of irks me continuously, and that's what basically gives me the motivation and the drive to keep going. In my view, everything that I've done along the way and since has been of a correct nature. Everything has been right from the point of view of everything we've tried, everything we proposed, everything that we've looked to try and sort of settle around, and so on and so on. They, on the other hand, have played the opposite game. They're ruthless. They couldn't care less. And they're clearly, in my view, out to sort of upend you, because ultimately that seems to be a solution that suits them also. It's almost as though they prefer default to regular payments.
And obviously from what you've said to me, that you were consistently paying arrears off, then they kept on sending you summonses for more money because they weren't happy with that amount. So it's kind of like you're paying what you've agreed to, but then they want more. And then when they're getting in that more scenario, then you have to fork out more, which means you're not able to pay the arrears, which makes it like this vicious circle. And that's essentially what little circle they want to get you on, so that they can spiral you down into the abyss of losing everything. Is that how I'm understanding it?
That is exactly the way it is, Bev. Most definitely, that's the way it is. They clearly have a sort of a one-track strategy in that regard. Once there's a sort of hint of things not being perfect to their liking, they look to basically take you out at any cost, and they do it. And they do it in such a way that quite honestly is downright unlawful and immoral, whichever way you look at it. We recently just had a pre-trial conference with ABSA where we put a reasonable proposal on the table, settlement proposal. Didn't even look at it, let alone even counter on it. They're not interested in settlement, actually. They're looking to basically clear the decks, wipe you out, and then go on. And that seems to be the sort of the MO right across the board. And that's what we're fighting against, because it's totally wrong.
And now I believe Advocate Douglas Shaw has been briefed by your attorney to assist you with this. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, Bev.
Okay, and then how has he helped you so far? What has been, I mean, you said he's been working with you for the last 3 years. What has he been doing to assist you? And how is he different from other people that you've been involved with legally from this perspective?
Good question, Bev. There are a lot of differences. There really are. I've been dealing with, just in this regard, let alone other business matters, I've been dealing with attorneys going back 7 odd years, specific to properties now. And I've met a lot of them. I've dealt with a lot of them, a number of advocates as well. And I can quite honestly say Douglas is a breed apart. He really is a breed apart. He has a different mindset around all of this. He's looking at what's fair, what's right, what's actually just. And he's looking ultimately at happily standing against banks, institutions, and anyone else for that matter who are doing incorrectly. And his heart is in the cause, so to speak. Money and so on is a secondary thing altogether. Douglas is looking to have wrongs corrected, to sort of look after the interest of the smaller person in comparison to the banks, and to really genuinely look to help and promote our causes and look after our interests in any way that he possibly can. And I've seen that sort of behavior consistent from him right from the inception, which is admirable. I can tell you right now, if I've seen 2 or 3 attorneys come advocates come close to that in my lifetime, it's a lot. So he's done a lot. He's bought me a lot of time as well. I mean, just in the last couple of years, I got divorced in the process as well, which obviously is another spanner in the spokes, creates a lot more pressure on existing assets and cash flow. Yet, there again, Douglas stepped in and helped me out. We ironed the whole thing out, got it squared up and put to bed last November or so. And that's just something on the side. That's just something on the side that obviously impacts, and it's a real life consideration. And in that regard, Douglas is understanding. He's very accommodating in any regards. When it comes to payment and that sort of thing, he's prepared to sort of look at ways and means of putting a plan together that suits your cash flow, your affordability, what is possible in the utmost effort to really help out. If I look at
to get the results that you're looking for, rather than just okay, I'm your legal representative, I'm going to do the best that I can, and you've got to pay me either which way, That's what I found personally, because I know I've got some of a family member of mine who's also having a thing with the banks, and that's how I actually got involved a bit with this. So that's why I think it's important for us to start to stand up and speak about it, rather than just keep it under cover and keep quiet about it. It's not really going to change anything.
Most definitely, you're so right there, and Douglas is exactly as you said, now being focused on the outcome. He's looking to achieve something positive for you, whether it be a bit of time that you need, whether it be really sort of hoping to correct a few wrongs in the process, whether it be sort of looking after elements of your defense that can have sway, that can basically force a better outcome. Douglas is focused on those, And he's been doing that for me incessantly from the inception. Just one last thing when it comes to payment. I've had literally hundreds of experiences over all the years, business-wise and otherwise. And generally speaking, with attorneys and advocates, they have a set fee. They pretty much want the money up front. They pretty much aren't obligated to any sort of outcome whatsoever. They're going to go through the motions. A lot of them just push pieces of paper around. And that is something that I was thoroughly disillusioned with. And if you remind Douglas of this, that's one of the things I spoke to him about when we first met 3 years ago. And I said to him, I don't want any of that. I'm not looking for somebody who's going to push pieces of paper around and whatever happens, happens. I'm looking for someone to look after my interests. And we started off on the right foot, and it's been that way ever since. Really good.
And he is quite creative with his ways of dealing with things, don't you think?
You are so right there, Bev. You're so right there. I'm pretty much a sort of creative person myself, and that's another thing we spoke about at the very first meeting. I was looking for creative legal inputs, not textbook inputs, because I knew at that point in time textbook inputs don't help at all. It doesn't take you anywhere. I wanted creative inputs, and Doug is that person, and he stayed true to form all the way through.
Awesome. All right, Kevin, is there anything else you'd like to share or add that you feel that the people of the world, so to speak, need to know, either about the truth about the banks, or about what your experience has been, or what to look for if they're looking for an advocate? Because there are obviously other advocates and attorneys who have got the same valiance, is the right word, valiancy, being valiant, caring about their clients. Is there anything you'd like to share before we end?
I would say when it comes to looking at a choice like Douglas, he's been so involved in the sort of banking sector in these sorts of regards, looking after clients' interests for so long now. He's really built up expertise in that regard that I would think aren't easily matched elsewhere. So I think that carries a lot of this way. A lot of the arguments that we built up, a lot of the sort of legalities that we sort of expanded upon in terms of defending ourselves have been developed in the last few years. There's a lot to be brought to bear here for new clients that they can absolutely leverage off. So I would say new clients sort of starting off and looking at a way forward, this is an excellent choice. It really is. There's so much history here that they can leverage immediately. They don't have to sort of run the learning curve as I did from 7 years ago, and they don't have to travel the path that we've traveled for 3 years. They can basically kick off with what we've already achieved and go forward from there. And the crux of the matter is you're looking to basically save your assets. You're looking for a way to sort of rectify the situation one way or another, fairly and ethically and appropriately, not to be steamrolled by the institutions. And Douglas is perfectly placed to do that for us. One last thing on the banks. As I said, I've had bonds with all four. I still have bonds with all four. And obviously with other matters, credit cards, overdrafts, things like that, there are a few of those that obviously came into the mix with the whole debt review scenario. So I've pretty much sort of dealt with all four banks across the board in these 7 years. Nobody must be fooled into thinking that any bank is better than the other. They're all exactly the same. And they all basically behave exactly the same way, and they basically all have the same outlook and the same sort of sense of dominance, and we'll do as we want regardless. So even sort of trying to move between banks doesn't make any difference at the end of the day.
It's not going to make a big difference. So just rather look at ways that you can be more creative and look for someone like Advocate Douglas Shaw, somebody, because obviously this might go out to any people in the world, look for someone who's got those kind of ethical standards and that's got to obviously support you from that perspective as well, yes?
No, most definitely. Advocate Shaw is an absolutely great choice. I'd recommend him very, very highly to anyone in need of anything that I've experienced along the way. And I can say unequivocally, the last 3 years for me have really turned things around in terms of allowing me the space that I need to sort of get my ducks in a row behind the scenes and to give us a fighting chance against the sort of steamroll effect of the institutions and the system. So, great choice all around to go with Douglas. And as I said, I'd recommend him highly to anyone looking for those sorts of services.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much, Kevin, for your time. It was great to chat to you today and great to hear your story. And thank you for sharing it because I'm sure that there's people out there that have had exactly the same kind of experience as you, being you know, squeaky clean, having everything, all their ducks in a row, and then because something happens in life, then that's what happens. Now, you know, where do you go to from there? So I just want to say congratulations for sticking it out so long, and thank you for joining us on this little interview today.
You're most welcome, Bev. It's my pleasure, and if it helps in any little way out there, I'm very happy.